Hi, I'm Renny Hartman, and I'm going to talk today briefly about two David Baldacci books. One, The Long Shadow, and the other, the new one, The 620 Man. Um, the 620 Man is the newer and has a new character, Travis Devine. I don't know if the Devine is supposed to give him a little godlike qualities or not, but he's not one of Baldacci's many series that run. I've talked about them before, and I always liked the Camel Club the best, I guess, because they were old people in DC who had lots of experience and background who could solve mysteries and problems. In the 620 Man, Devine is an interesting character, and maybe he's going to get his own series. He's a former ranger. He's been to college. He's been to Afghanistan and Iraq. He has a tremendous amount of physical power, and he has come home in his early 30s to go into the Wall Street milieu, and he's working for a company called Cal and Cumley, although the Cumley ends up being not a person towards the end of the book, and nobody knows who that partner is. And Cowell, who is Brad Cowell, who is the leader, is a kind of Epstein person in the sense that he rose enormously to become a multi-billionaire without many people knowing exactly why or how that had happened. And Devine becomes what he calls a newbie or a burner. They're the people that are brought in to do a tremendous amount of research on whether the company is going to buy a company or whether the company is going to sell a company and increase its assets or shift its assets. And he talks about them spending hours and hours all the time. They even work on Saturdays. And of course, there is a murder, and that starts the mystery beginning. There is a murder of one of the women who's not a newbie. She's an experienced person who looks like she was on her way up. The building has a 51st floor, which nobody can access, and they all call it Area 51 as if it were out in New Mexico and was Area 51, where we think all the UFOs are kept. But eventually, Travis Devine gets access, and he finds it's full of multiple huge servers, an enormous space filled with all this computer material. And he has explained to him that all of the big financial companies like J.P. Morgan and all the rest, Lehman when it once existed, do high-frequency trades where they can get in milliseconds before something is sold or milliseconds before something is bought and going to go up. And they do this and shift around trillions of dollars practically. They come in and out of foreign countries. They go into private businesses. They go into somebody's pocket. They are hardly justified. I thought that was the most interesting part of the book, was how that high frequency trading supposedly happens, because we are being alerted here occasionally that Bill Gates of Microsoft now owns the most private farmland in the United States, and yet he does not want us to eat hot dogs and hamburgers and peas and carrots. He wants us to eat crickets and worms. So I don't know what he's going to do with that farmland. And supposedly also the Chinese government, which is not exactly always our best friend, is buying into companies and trying to get 51% so that they can influence the company to buy land that the Chinese also intend to somehow take care of or do something with. And the high frequency trading would certainly feed into that really well. Unfortunately, in a sense, the solving of the mystery, there's one murder, then there's another murder, then there's a double murder, and then there's this guy who ends up in a pool. There's 5 deaths by the time we get to the end, really aren't directly connected to all the rest of the book that is about Wall Street. And I have to say, until that point, until the resolution that we would call denouement, because the French short story writer Guy de Maupassant invented the denouement, which is the long explanation of a resolution. That would fit very well here. It's several chapters, but really is not particularly involved in the Wall Street business at all. And I found that disappointing. Now, I like the character of Travis Devine, and I have a feeling maybe some of the Wall Street business eventually at the end, the floor of 51 is available to everybody, and it's empty. They've taken out all the computers. They said they've moved them to Queens, and that's where they're going to do high frequency. But actually, by the end, the company is dead, and what happens to all of it, I have no idea. Maybe that's going to show up in another book. I don't know. It had a tremendous amount of money. If we dumped all of that money into the economy, we'd just increase our inflation. So I would hope that that's not what they think happens in the book. The other one is slightly earlier, The Long Shadow, and that does have a character, Amos Decker, that is part of Baldacci's characters that he develops. He had an accident as a sports player and injured his head and developed that kind of memory that knows everything. Everything he sees, hears, reads, experience is kept in the forefront of his memory all of the time, and he's been called the memory man. He's connected in some way to the FBI. He's not an actual FBI agent, but then there is a murder of a judge in Florida. This is always something that the federal government likes to get involved in, especially if it's a high-ranking judge. So he is sent there, and he gets a new partner. She is full FBI. She's called Freddie, and her family and home is in Baltimore. She would rather be full-time in D.C., and she and Decker do not get along too well to begin with, but become much more adjusted and attached in the end. I have to say it's a book where actually I could figure out who the murderer was before the end of the book, which almost never happens, partly because sometimes, like Sir Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, if you read a lot of Sherlock Holmes, you discover that the person who's the criminal or the person that is responsible for the crime actually isn't introduced until the very end of the book, or was such a minor character you would never have considered that person be the one that was actually going to get named or arrested or become the one that solves the mystery. That is not true in The Long Shadow. I think that makes the book better to read, that the person who reads the book actually has some kind of shot out of finding out who might actually have caused the murder. We're also set in Florida, and I like the setting. I very much like Sanford's Ocean Prey that was set in Florida. I liked Prey in the beginning when it was just set in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the upper Midwest, of which I knew nothing, and that made the books very interesting to me. And I like Florida. I don't think that I'm going to live in Florida, but I have a number of friends who live in Florida. I used to go practically every year with my son and his family to Disney World and have seen Florida just flourished. When I first went with my family in 2011 and you went into Orlando Airport, it was a little airport with 2 small terminals. And to rent a car, you drove out onto a black top that was in the middle of nowhere. There were no lights. There were no signs on the roads. You just had to, in some ways, guess where you were going. Now it looks just like North Jersey. There's 6 lanes going here, 6 lanes going here, housing absolutely everywhere. And the airport is now, you have to go from terminal to terminal in monorail. So in that decade, Florida has just absolutely flourished, and I think Florida makes a lovely setting. And that works really, really well in The Long Shadow. And then you find out, of course, that the reason the judge is dead is probably not what anybody was thinking until we get really towards the end of the book. Whether it was a case that she was involved in, whether it was somehow personal life she was involved in, whether it was something to do with disputes with neighbors or missing neighbors or some of the other things that occur. But Decker also discovers in this book that his memory is no longer perfect. His brain is possibly changing a little bit in some way. And I imagine that'll be carried on into other books. He's a very kind of fascinating character because of the way he has to address life as if everything in his past is present and forward in his memory, unlike the rest of us who have things that slip away, and unless we're reminded of them, they are not something that we are concerned with all the time. So he lives with a very strange kind of situation, and but the author handles him perfectly. He seems very real. I would say in some ways he's more real as a person, a former athlete, than Travis Devine is, because Devine is a little too perfect for an adventure or action movie, and he's a former ranger. He can fight 3 or 4 people at the same time. He's very good at defending himself. He's excellent at, he goes out and works at 4 o'clock in the morning before he takes that 6:20 train that the novel is named for. And he's very kept up to date. He's not married. He's not attached. And that leaves him open to all kinds of liaisons with women here and there as they may occur. But it makes him in some ways too perfect, whereas Amos is a little strange. He knows it himself, and he knows the way he acts is that way himself, and he has to live with the situation that he's in all of the time. I would say all of the books are excellent. I like one more than the other. I like The Long Shadow a little bit more than I like The 6:20 Man, because I do not like the ending, which I will not reveal. That's all for now.